Well, hello, recreational therapists. Thank you so much for coming to my presentation today. I am so fortunate that this presentation at the Smart CEU retreat went as well as it did. The amount of people that showed up in person for this event humbled me, made me feel super proud that like Smart CEUs Hub has created an impact in people's lives, so much so that they were willing to pay money to come in person. And you don't even know how important that is for a business owner when you see the reaction to your work that you've been putting in for many years. So thank you guys so much for coming again. For those of you that did not come to the Smart CEU retreat in the Bradford Woods, we're going to be doing another one next year because of the responses. But I also wanted to be able to relay this information to you via a presentation that you can take online on our platform on smartceusub.com. And you can take advantage of all the different sessions that we provided throughout this conference, which people will be recording and then submitting when they have the ability and the time. So my presentation today will actually be really important to the majority of recreational therapists, and it has to do with the shared history of therapeutic recreation and behavioral health. So for those of you that don't know this fact right off the bat, about 66% of all recreational therapists work in the behavioral health environment, and they are able to relate to the content. But then the rec therapists that work in physical health and community, etc., there's going to be some overlap with behavioral health as well, as you can tell when somebody has a traumatic brain injury, or when somebody has a spinal cord injury, or some sort of they're an amputee, etc., PTSD, etc., because their life has changed, and the things that they once were able to do, they may not be able to do again. But behavioral health impacts all of our lives. So that's why we started off with this for our first retreat, having everything behavioral health focused. Also for the specialty certification that NCTRC provides. You need 70 clock hours of behavioral health specific continuing education every 5 years in order to get that specialty certification in behavioral health, or for recreational therapy in behavioral health. So without further ado, I'd like to start with this presentation today: the shared history of therapeutic recreation and behavioral health. Here we go. Okay, so a little bit about me. My name is Nathan Lemaster. I am a CTRS. I live in Tyler, Texas, with my wife and my daughter, Isabella. And I started Smart CEUs Hub about 7.5 years ago, based off of a few factors. One was that I was living in Texas now. I came from California originally, and in Texas, not a lot of people knew what recreational therapists were. And I ended up going an hour away each day. So in Longview, Texas, an hour commute each day to a behavioral health hospital to go work as a recreational therapist. Well, what that meant was I had an hour drive there and back every single day. So 2 hours of my day were driving. And with that being said, I listened to podcasts such as Smart Passive Income by Pat Flynn, and a lot of other information like the Entrepreneurs on Fire podcast by John Lee Dumas. But I got to learn about starting a business, as well as in our field, finding out what the pain points were. One pain point being the education gap that we have, being that like I came from a school that had a certain amount of classes that we were required to take that I felt there were certain classes that I wish would have been required that would have prepared me better for what I would actually be doing in the field, such as like documentation, saying that it's such an important part of every area a rec therapist works in. But the same goes with like a lot of rec therapists I've talked to in their schools. They've learned certain things, but then when you graduate, the field is very different than what they learned in school. So Smart CEUs Hub was created to help bridge that gap in education after graduation, as well as, provide a way for people to get accessible continuing education that was also affordable. Because a lot of times conferences, et cetera, cost a lot of money. And so Smart CEUs Hub was created so that you could take your continuing education from your house at a reasonable price. And then also we believe in paying people for their content. So we pay our instructors a residual monthly income. That being said, I also own 2 other businesses. I own CEU Cloud, which you can see on my hat right here. CEU Cloud is an app that helps people track their continuing education requirements via their mobile device, and it's all stored in the cloud. And when it comes time to turning it in, they can print or download it, and then have it ready for like NCTRC or whatever board they have. It's not necessarily recreational therapy specific. And then I have an invention I got patented called the pill puncher that opens blister packs of medicine. All right. So with this slide, that's a lot about me. And, I'm very privileged to be giving this keynote about the shared history of our field and behavioral health. So today I hope that you learn a few things, and we're going to go over those in the next slide. So, the description is that you'll learn about how recreational therapy developed as a profession, as well as how we entered the behavioral health setting. We also learn about the pivots RT has taken along the way with the different professional membership organizations that have been in charge of directing our field. And then also you'll be able to take away from this session a better understanding how we can continue to grow in this setting and other settings as well, based off of the information that we learned in the past. I'm going to be presenting to you some ideas and some thoughts, which obviously you are more than welcome to critique and come up with your own ideas, but I'm throwing these out there to kind of help lead the conversation in this way. Right. So 3 objectives that we will have for this presentation. The attendee will have learned about the 5 governing bodies throughout the history of RT, which have helped shape modern day recreational therapy. So those of you that don't know what the 5 are, we'll be going over that. The attendee will also have learned about the 2 major philosophies. So treatment philosophies are models of delivery, which shape treatment modalities in recreational therapy, as well as where the profession is headed through its current governing body. So current governing body being ACHA currently. And then 3rd, the attendee will have learned about recreational therapy's current roles and the overall behavioral health care system. So you also learn about what our role is in the most utilized field for recreational therapy, which is behavioral health. So a majority of you will actually find this information very helpful, hopefully. So here we go. Table of contents, so 3 sections: the history of our profession, number 2, RT treatment philosophies, and 3, our role in the behavioral health setting, breaking them down into 3 areas and the 3 objectives. First area, the history of our profession. We're going to start with Plato, because Plato actually was one of the first public people that have referred to recreational therapy or recreation as a way to bring about positive life attributes to people. And so his quote right here is, "You can learn more about a man in an hour of play than in a lifetime of conversation." And as a recreational therapist, you know this to be true. We really get to figure out what makes people tick and what they like to do and what they find important about themselves and about life. can really help direct different treatments that we prescribe and that we perform with our interventions. But this all started in Plato and ancient Greece. So let's keep going. All right, in the beginning, ancient teachings were the first where we hear about the benefits of recreation experiences. So this is way before Florence Nightingale, which you may have heard about in school. This is like 500 AD. Like we're talking about like basically after Jesus, and throughout the rest of time. So the quote on the previous slide from Plato clearly shows that play has a unique way of being used to understand someone, as it allows for demonstrations of the inner workings of the human beings. And by the statement, what I mean, what motivates them, their goals and outlook on life, what their cognitive proclivities are, and what they feel insecure or confident about. As recreational therapists, we're very perceptive as to what makes someone tick. From here, we build the therapeutic relationships with our clients, which includes trust and understanding, just like Plato stated. Our unique skill set gives us a way in with clients so that the therapeutic process actually can begin. But it wasn't until much later that people started thinking of recreation as a means to therapy. So here we are talking about how recreation can be used to understand people better. But that understanding then leads to a way to help them, which is what therapy is all about. So here we go. All right, we're gonna fast forward all the way to 1780. So we're in the 1700s now, folks. And in 1780, there was a published in Paris a text, Gymnastique Médicinale et Chirurgicale, which hopefully is not a horrible pronunciation of the French, but it was by Clement Joseph Tissot, which recommended and prescribed recreation activities as a therapeutic exercise. And there were two sections of this text that have been translated and quoted by Dr. Sidney Litch in April of 1949 issue of Occupational Therapy and Rehabilitation. So this stuff that started in 1780 has been translated from the texts that were recorded into modern-esque era in 1949, specifically to occupational therapy, which some of you may already know this, but we actually stemmed out of occupational therapy in the 1940s after World War II. So that is why there's still some tension to this very day with what their scope of practice is and what ours is. So here are the two parts that were quoted. Convalescents having acquired greater strength may proceed to horseback riding. So this is an example of they have achieved a certain amount of physical strength that they're able to participate in a recreational therapy activity that may be the goal of their purpose for why they were going to the doctor or going to the occupational therapist or recreational therapist. Also, in referencing taking people hunting, it was concluded that hunting induces perspiration and recreates the mind at the same time that it fatigues the body. So you can see more of a physical exercise standpoint how hunting was used as a recreational therapy modality, and was at the point which people started equating outcomes using recreation as a modality. So they started seeing that doing these certain activities produced this certain result, and they were able to start kind of putting these things together as, okay, well, if this person comes to me for this particular problem, we know what the result will be if we do these modalities. And so that's why these modalities were used. So this is like the beginning of research for our field in the 1970s or 1980s, all the way to 1949. All right, in the 1850s, so we fast forward a little bit, the premise of therapeutic recreation can be traced all the way back to the mid 1850s when Florence Nightingale, the founder of modern nursing, proposed that recreation and leisure experiences could be drawn upon to help improve the quality of life for all people. So you may have heard this in your classes about Florence Nightingale being credited as not only the mother of modern nursing, but also the founder of recreational therapy. But it was because of her notoriety that she was able to get some of these things that she had stated that would actually help our field along those routes for recreational therapy. But it wasn't until 1919 when the brothers Carl and William Menninger, leaders in the field of psychiatry, coined the term recreational therapy, that we started adapting it to this way of thinking. So until 1919, these ideas about how recreation could be used as a therapy were not coined as a therapy until 1919 when Carl and William Menninger were the two that put that together and actually coined that term. So our field actually came into existence, etc., officially through Carl and William Menninger. In 1931, the first recreational hospital workers were being hired by the American Red Cross to help aid in treating behavioral health patients. After the first case studies by the Menninger brothers, recreational therapy showed its positive therapeutic value by improving clients' behavioral health symptoms, and other psychiatrists throughout the country began to adopt this therapy as part of their treatment plans. So it started becoming more well-known and more used. Recreational therapy was also incorporated in the education efforts of people who had developmental disabilities, but eventually these programs started to phase out as people held the unrealistic idea of a cure for these clients. So as we know, sometimes with a developmental disability, recreational therapy can improve symptoms, etc., but it's not a cure. It doesn't get rid of the disability. And so like those programs started to phase out because people were like, well, this doesn't actually cure the illness. And that was at the phase where they thought they could cure this. So in 1948, the American Red Cross had a shortage of donations and eliminated 4/5 of all their recreational therapy programs. So only 20% existed after that. 80% of them were phased out. At this time, the recreation hospital workers, in an effort to preserve the profession, decided it would be best to align themselves with the American Recreation Society, which was ARS. This is the first professional organization that represented recreational therapy back in 1948, and became the hospital recreation section of ARS. This group, led by Harold D. Meyer, started to promote college curriculum that was very similar to already existing community recreation component of the parks and recreation industry, and held the philosophy that recreation is an end in itself, and such met a specific human need for the participants who were institutionalized. So in this case, the idea was people that are institutionalized need recreation. They can't function and live a whole life without it. And so by us providing recreation for people that are institutionalized, we are fulfilling a human need. So it wasn't that recreation per se was a treatment. It was more so that it needed to exist so that it filled the need. Does that make sense? Hopefully it does. We'll continue on. In 1952 and 1956. So in 1952, B.E. Phillips and other like-minded individuals did not agree that this was the best philosophy to allow for the field to develop and grow on a professional level. They dissented and formed the Recreation Therapy Association, which is RTA, the second professional organization, which was a division of the American Association of Health, Physical Education, and Recreation. AAHPER's philosophy was that recreational therapy's primary purpose is to assist physicians in their treatment of patients as a mean to recovery. So you can kind of see where at the stage where people started having a difference in opinion on how recreational therapy should operate. Should it be that we are providing opportunities for people with disabilities so they can lead a fuller life? Or should we be viewing recreational therapy as a way to use recreation and leisure as a tool, per se, to help somebody and rehabilitating or getting treatment? So the original credentialing body of therapeutic recreation personnel began in 1956 with the establishment of the Commission for the Advancement of Hospital Recreation, CAHR, which later was replaced by the National Council of Therapeutic Recreation Certification, which is NCTRC, in 1981. So before NCTRC, there was another organization that handled the credentialing for our field. That was the Commission for the Advancement of Hospital Recreation. Okay. In 1965, AAHPER and the ARS combined, so those two organizations combined to form the National Recreation Therapy Society, which was NTRS, which you may have heard about in school. This is the first one we had heard about in school, was NTRS, which was a branch of the National Recreation and Park Association, which was NRPA. So they decided that they were going to partner with each of the states, the National Recreation and Parks Association. So under the realm of Parks and Recreation, basically, versus clinical. This was due to the idea together could form a stronger whole along with the other branches of NRPA. They figured as recreational therapy that they could have the same lobbyists, etc., get bills passed, etc., that would work for recreational therapy as long as they paired with an RPA. Both organizations believe that together with the other branches of NRPA, they could be stronger. However, because the differences in philosophies were still very apparent, as you remember, one was viewing recreation as a treatment modality, while the other one was looking at it as a means to living a full life. They had a very different viewpoint. And NTRS could not agree on its own basic tenets because of it, so they couldn't decide what they stood for. If you can't decide what you stood for, you have no brand, and you have no way to tell other people what you're all about. The disagreement lasted all the way into the 1970s and eventually became a point of disagreement with NRPA. So this is where the tensions rose. And it was the consensus of NTRS that one of its goals should be treatment. So they decided amongst all the different opinions that treatment should be one of the main goals, which was unlike the rest of NRPA. So NRPA, Parks and Recreation Association, focused more on providing opportunities for people to get involved in recreation versus NTRS, which focused on using recreation and leisure as treatment modalities. So they were paired with this organization that did not have the same philosophy, is what they're saying. This led to a discussion in the 1980s about the need to form a separate organization apart from the NRPA. Dave Park, the former executive secretary and past president of NTRS, decided to take a bold position. He and a group of other recreational therapists met and decided to take action. It was at this point that he and a committee composed of Carol Peterson, Dave Austin, Ray West, Dick Beckley, and Melinda Conway proposed a definition of recreational therapy that would help separate it from the rest of the parks and recreation industry. So this is when they get down and dirty with the definition and put it on paper. All right, and the first ever definition that was proposed about our field was therapeutic recreation is the provision of treatment services and the provision of recreation services to persons with illnesses or disabling conditions. The primary purpose of treatment services, which are referred to as recreational therapy, are to restore, remediate, and rehabilitate in order to improve functionality and independence, as well as reduce or eliminate the effects of illness or disability. The primary purposes of recreation services are to provide recreation resources and opportunities in order to improve health and well-being. Therapeutic recreation is provided by professionals who are trained and certified, registered, and or licensed to provide therapeutic recreation. So you can see this definition is quite long, and to probably the average person, they would not understand what it meant. It wasn't written in layman's terms. So we'll be talking about that a little bit later. In 1981, as we talked about, NCTRC came into the mix, and they were an independent credentialing agency designed to meet national credentialing standards in the United States. And then a volunteer leadership managed NCTRC in 1981. And by 1985, 3 part-time staff members were added to manage the growing certification program. In September 1986, the first full-time executive director was hired along with 2 full-time clerical personnel. Today, NCTRC employs 7 full and 1 part-time staff member. They also have some volunteers as well, which are on their board. But if you call them, don't expect them to be this ginormous organization. Expect them to be about 7, maybe 8 people that are actually working on the 19,800 recreational therapy CTRSs in the country. So quite a big role for them. What did you think? All right, in 1984 and 1985, due in part to the hard work of the NTRS committee and the new definition formed, growth in the profession we already know today continued. On June 12, 1984, the American Therapeutic Recreation Association was officially incorporated in Washington, D.C. by 50 founding members who each contributed $100 to the forming of the new organization. So ATRA, they were started in 1984. These members elected an interim board of directors, with Peg Connolly as the president, who were charged to complete the Articles of Incorporation for this new organization, which you probably heard of the Peg Connolly Award. By 1985, the membership of ATRA had grown to 300 members from the original 50. So at that time, there were about 300 members. Currently, there are around 2,600 members. In 1986 to 2003, as ATRA grew, there were still members of NTRS who held on to the prior philosophy that recreation in itself, which caused a division in the field. So we still had people that still believed more of recreation participation is the result of recreational therapy versus recreation and leisure as a tool to help people achieve, like, for instance, physical strength, improved depression, improved mental capacity, those types of things. Ultimately, in 1996, both organizations decided to adopt a joint resolution and were served to direct the profession moving forward. It was in 2003 that NTRS phased out completely and left ATRA as the sole helm to the direction of our profession, which remains true to present day. So NTRS phased out as ATRA kept growing. They could not stay in business. And when they disappeared, ATRA became the only one. But there's still those people that held on to the beliefs that NTRS proposed still exist, and they are opposed to what ATRA believes. So there are some people in our country that are recreational therapists that like it or not, don't agree with ATRA. ATRA's definition of recreational therapy varies from NTRS's and is what's published on their website today. This being said, ATRA's definition of recreational therapy. Recreational therapy, also known as therapeutic recreation, is a systematic process that utilizes recreation and other activity-based interventions to address the assessed needs of individuals with illnesses and or disabling conditions as a means to psychological and physical health, recovery, and well-being. Further, recreational therapy means a treatment service designed to restore, remediate, or rehabilitate a person's level of functioning and independence in life activities to promote health and wellness, as well as reduce and eliminate the activity limitations or restrictions to participation in life situations caused by an illness or disabling condition. As you can see also by reading this definition is quite long. It is more defined in the treatment focus. However, it is still quite long, and for the average person, they may or may not understand this. So this definition is really based off of what us as recreational therapists believe what we do as a profession. It's not meant as our elevator pitch per se to teach people what recreational therapy is, which we'll go about later. All right. So now that you are all caught up in all the history of our profession and understanding what brought us to today, what kind of changes along the way, why those changes were made, and those different philosophies different organizations held for our field, you bring us to modern day recreational therapy, which still holds on to certain aspects of both what the old way recreational therapy was viewed and the new way recreational therapy is viewed. So you may have heard this, that we still have conflict in our own field of defining ourselves, or should we be licensed? Should we have a bachelor's degree, a master's degree, so that we're respected? Should we appeal to the 3-hour rule? Should we focus on community recreation? Should we, all these different things. So there's a plethora of arguments in our field. So I'm going to present the philosophies that we currently have. And I'm also going to present some proposed solutions and proposed ideas that can help unify us, because I firmly believe that if we are not unified, we do not move forward together. If we do not move forward together, then our field dies, and we need to have agreed upon basic principles so that we can tell our clients what a recreational therapist does, so that they can know when to ask for our services. It's that basic. So without further ado, RT treatment philosophies. So the importance of philosophy. Literally, the term philosophy means love of wisdom. So it's understanding wisdom is applied knowledge. In a broad sense, philosophy is an activity people undertake when they seek to understand fundamental truths about themselves, the world in which they live, their relationships, and the world and each other. Philosophies impact our thinking process, our decisions, and our ethics and morals. They are also the basic framework of how we choose to move forward in life. And in this section, we'll be discussing the two overarching treatment philosophies impacting the direction of our field today. We're not discussing which is more important or right, rather than critically thinking about how our chosen philosophy will lead us to our desired outcomes. Because I know people watching this may or may not agree with everything that is stated, but this argument is intended to give a point of view either for if you have that same philosophy, or contrary if you have a different view of what our field should be, so you can understand why I personally think this philosophy is the most important for us. But obviously, like I said, I am not trying to tell you I am right 100%. I'm trying to tell you this is the philosophy and this is why I believe it, so that you can either make that decision for yourself, or you can kind of like be informed at least about what the other side believes. All right, key points of understanding. I'm gonna drink some coffee. All right. This goes about with everything in life. Knowing our history is key to understanding the current issues facing the world we live in today. As discovered by this look into our history, one of the biggest factors impacting recreational therapy is a fundamental identity crisis based on two treatment philosophies directing the profession's overarching goals. The questions we must all ask ourselves as recreational therapists, and these are the two philosophies: do I align myself with the philosophy of recreational therapy's primary purpose being that recreation is an end in itself, and as such met a specific human need for those persons who are institutionalized? Or two, do I align myself with the philosophy of recreational therapy's primary purpose, being to assist in the treatment of our clients as a means to recovery, restoration, or rehabilitation? So the first one is more of the Parks and Recreation view of the NRPA view, NTRS view of our field, and the second is more of the ATRA view of our field. All right, considerations, things to think about while you're making your decisions. And this comes from my own opinion. So I believe the answer to this question of philosophy must be agreed upon for us, the recreational therapists of the world, to successfully move forward in the same direction as a profession. So we're unified, moving in the same direction. Otherwise, I fear the danger will be that we continue down the same path of disagreements and dissensions that have held us back in the past. Things that have slowed us down to when occupational therapy broke off from us in the 1940s, why they pursued a clinical route and why we pursued a Parks and Recreation route, which now has led to them growing to like hundreds of thousands of people and us being 19,800. So that's facts, basically. We cannot be headed in two separate directions to expect to make any headway. So if you ever heard the parable of the oxen, right? If you have an uneven yoke, you have more pull on one side of the oxen than the other, the oxen will go around in circles, but it won't make any progress forward. And so being on the same page and being evenly yoked, we will actually move in the same direction. All right, for a majority of those that working in the profession, we want our field to be respected, correct? Doesn't matter if you work in community or clinical, it is something we all share in common. But in order to do this, we must first have a shared identity, aka a professional brand that we can market to the rest of the world. So when I ask you, what does a physical therapist do? They work with rehabilitation for people who have had some sort of traumatic brain injury, spinal cord injury, physical injury, and they're building strength up in their limbs. Occupational therapists, even though theirs is a little more vague because the word occupation is in their title, but they do activities of daily living and fine motor skills. So like their fingers, their toes, being able to extend to get their clothes on, to brush their hair, etc., things that they would be doing outside of the hospital. But when you think of recreational therapy, if I work in behavioral health, I'm teaching coping skills. If I work in physical rehab, I'm teaching fine motor skills and gross motor skills and getting people to participate in leisure activities. If I work in geriatrics, I'm more like an activity director doing daily programming and life enrichment. If I work in community centers, I could either be working with people with developmental disabilities or severe emotional disturbances, but I could be teaching them life skills like budgeting or manners or things of that nature to where they're able to function in society better. But if you ask the general public what a recreational therapist does, the title in itself makes it think that we just play games all day, recreation, right? And what does the value in that actually have for people? And so that's the real truth. And unless we correct that that definition or that interpretation of us, you know, through our consistent branding, we won't have people ask for us, which means we won't get bills passed, which means we won't get licensure, which means we won't get the respect that we want, etc. So this has to happen. It's not an option. Either that or we die. So really think about this as a really important thing. All right. For people to really understand who we are, what we do, and to ask for us by name, we must need a singular message to describe our field, like I just said. Otherwise, we will continue on this merry-go-round ride, going in circles, but never really getting anywhere. If we don't make it a priority to fix this, we could dissolve as a profession altogether, which none of us actually want. So we see the value of recreational therapy. You and I both see that. So, establishing our identity. What is recreational therapy? what is a recreational therapist? What do we do? Do we have a brand or an identity? The problem area discussed above is a problem of identity, like I just said. Thus, the goal I have decided to work toward in this section is to provide my reasoning, my personal reasoning, for what identity I think the field of therapeutic recreation should align. And please understand that I am presenting my own personal point of view. If you have a differing point of view from what our identity should look like as a profession, I welcome you to add your perspective to the conversation through Facebook, through email, etc., social media, that you can kind of point out why you think our field should align ourselves in a certain way and what that would actually do for our whole entire field. So the goal is not to argue. The goal is to rather bring apart new information, which leads to understanding and critical thinking. So that's what I'm doing here, just so you understand. I'm presenting you a point of view so that you can critically think about it and decide if this is the best for our field. Okay. Here's my personal point of view. I propose we align ourselves with the following identity for describing recreational therapy and what a recreational therapy does. Recreational therapy is the practice of using recreation and leisure activities as tools, interventions to help restore and improve functioning of individuals in the 5 domains of human life, which is physical, cognitive, emotional, social, and spiritual. The recreational therapist uses a systematic approach of APIDE process to deliver these interventions regardless of their work setting and or their served population. So that unifies both clinical and community. But here's a very short version, an elevator pitch for you. This is what, if somebody asks you what a recreational therapist is or what do you do for a living, this is what you say. So in the following five slides, I will go into this, why we should all adopt this shared philosophy and move our profession forward. So this information that we're going to get, this is a shorter definition, a more straightforward definition, but this is why. All right, reason number 1, it establishes us as a helping profession rather than an activity or event planner, which already exists separately from recreational therapy, etc. Like, for example, activity directors, cruise ship directors, recreation leaders, sports managers, etc. Those professions already exist. That does not make us any different than them. Okay. By differentiating ourselves in this way, it helps the public and members of the interdisciplinary team know that we play a different role in the workforce. We are not just doing those things. We are a helping profession, which means we are specifically looking at treatment. Okay. And a little asterisk, this does not mean that I view activity directors or people that do activity planning or any of those things as less than recreational therapy. I view them as different than recreational therapy, which means that those positions are important. They're very useful, but they are not what we went to school for. So, reason number 2, it allows the profession to create streamlined marketing materials to spread the word of what we do and to create a professional brand. The way we describe ourselves to the general population should be unified across the board. For example, occupational therapists, firefighters, policemen, doctors, etc. The general public knows what each of these fields do and who to go to for certain problems that they're facing. So for instance, but then within each of the broad titles, there can also be specialties. So, but the main connecting job category is the same. So example, doctor of podiatry, which is a foot doctor. Firefighter, paramedic, which is a firefighter who also works as a paramedic. Motorcycle policeman is a police officer that utilizes a motorcycle to do his job or her job. The central brand would then be a helping profession, and this is your elevator pitch for our field, would be a helping profession that utilizes or uses recreation and leisure activities as tools to restore and improve functioning in the 5 domains of life in a variety of settings. Simple. a helping profession that uses recreation and leisure activities as a tool to restore and improve functioning in the 5 domains of life in a variety of settings. Okay, so that encompasses all that we do. It's a lot shorter and it's to the point. It does not make us look like we are crazy, like complicated language. It is, something that the average consumer can understand, and we could all adopt that no matter what setting we work in. And it makes it super simple and easy to repeat. Okay. Number 3, it creates a place for us to thrive in the ever-expanding healthcare industry. According to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, the healthcare industry as a whole is expected to grow by 1.9 million jobs in the next 10 years. So it's growing pretty fast. And we need jobs if we want adequate pay for a profession. And in the healthcare environment where most recreational therapists work, long-term care, behavioral health, physical rehabilitation, those 3 areas, we can create more jobs for us and also receive a higher paycheck due to the ability to bill insurance. So you may have heard Asher talk about being able to bill Medicare. Well, there's also Medicaid waivers in each of the states that, well, most of the states have them, to where a recreational therapist can bill for their services. For instance, in Texas, we have one of the highest paid reimbursement programs through Medicaid. You get to work with people with developmental disabilities or severe emotional disturbances, and they actually reimburse recreational therapists $77.24 an hour, which is a pretty good paycheck. And you can start whole businesses based off of that and hire the recreational therapists, which then creates jobs, which creates awareness of our field, etc. So, that's just one way. In Michigan, they bill no-fault auto insurance, for another example. So somebody gets in a wreck and they need rehabilitation, they can ask for a recreational therapist and receive services. So that's a really cool thing too. Very outside the box. All right. So just like we just talked about, there's also current efforts to promote the inclusion of recreational therapy under Medicare's 3-hour rule, which means you can receive 3 hours of therapy from a specific source and bill Medicare each week. However, recreational therapy was taken off of that 3-hour rule in 2010, and the language became very obscure. And so with that being said, Asher's big effort was trying to get us back on there, which would then allow us in the physical rehabilitation realm to be able to bill insurance. But as I stated earlier, 66% of us work in behavioral health. So some of the things that we need to be focusing on, in my opinion, are more behavioral health focused, because that is our biggest area. But when you create money for an organization through your billing, they're more likely to hire you than if you are just an expense. So if a recreational therapist becomes an expense for a hospital versus them bringing in more money than they're costing the hospital, then they're more likely to hire them because they see them as an asset to building their business, rather than just something cool to have as an offering. So that's something to think about. All right, reason number 4, it allows us to establish a core curriculum amongst our schools. And I don't know if you heard this, but NCTRC recently made the important decision to increase the amount of RT related courses that were required that you have to take before taking the CTRS exam from 5 to 6. So there's 6 classes now that have to be the same no matter what school you go to. The other courses are kind of up to the school themselves, which kind of still leads us to that whole bridging the gap problem. But there are organizations that are helping these universities get on an accredited program, which means that the program then is overseen by an outside organization like CART or COPART. These are 2 organizations that provide provide a structure for universities and their recreational therapy programs, including how many courses they should have available to them, what their internship should look like, etc. But the school has to voluntarily go through them. CART, last time I spoke to them, had about 14 schools out of 70 something schools that provide RT in the US going under their jurisdiction. I don't know how many are for COPART, but that goes to say that that's a nice way to kind of regulate, or at least give people the same baseline when they graduate, so that person that graduates from California and person that graduates from the Midwest and person that graduates from New York can start the same job and have the same background information to do the job effectively, versus maybe one of them was really well prepared and the other one was not. All right, reason number 5. It will help us explain to everyone why we exist and why we're important and why we're unique. So having a treatment focus of recreation and leisure as a tool for aiding in a client's recovery allows us to forge our own niche in the market that no other profession can encroach upon. So occupational therapy does have a part of their scope that says recreation and leisure activities is part of what they can do with clients. However, reality is they rarely ever get to that because they're focused on activities of daily living, etc. But us focusing on that area of people's life, which is super important, is going to create a niche which allows us to be like the perceived experts in that area. So if somebody wants to receive therapy that is specific to those areas, they know a recreational therapist is the one that provides that type of therapy. In contrast, if we instead adopted the recreation and leisure are the outcomes, which is like the old NTRS idea, that our identity will continue to be undistinguishable between activity planners, recreation workers, cruise directors, and other professions I mentioned that are focused on activities, and which doesn't really show us why we need to go to school or get a certification, et cetera, because activity directors, they have activity director certification, or cruise directors, they don't really need one. You just need a bachelor's degree, et cetera. And so like to actually prove why our field is different and unique, we can't be doing the same things, doing the same type of jobs. Otherwise, they'd hire the cheaper person, which would probably be one of them. So it's counterproductive is what I believe, to have that mindset, because it does not give us good recognition or respect, and the skill sets that we possess. So I know that probably is a hard, controversial point, but it is something I believe. If you have that mindset about our field, you aren't distinguishing it from any other field. Therefore, you're not helping our field to grow. So, all right. Now, the question you need to ask yourself is, what is your personal treatment philosophy? I presented mine, and I presented, from my point of view, the reasons why I have that treatment philosophy and why I think it's important that we all adopt it. But like I said, it is okay to have a different opinion than me, and it is okay to formulate your own opinion based off of your own experience and knowledge base. However, I challenge you to really consider what I presented to you, so that maybe if you didn't hold those beliefs, that you could possibly think about tweaking your beliefs to fit those things. And my hope is that we can all learn something from each other. So you might present something that I need to learn, and that would be super important as well. So, all right, last chapter, our role in the behavioral health setting. So we talked about our history, talked about how we connected to behavioral health through our history, working with the American Red Cross and people who are institutionalized. We talked about treatment philosophies, which would then hopefully lead us down the clinical route. And then our role in behavioral health settings, which obviously is more clinical than it is community. So here we go. The behavioral health sector. You don't need to work in behavioral health to come across somebody with a behavioral health need. Is that true? So for instance, in a community center or in a physical rehab, you're going to be coming across people who have mental illness. The statistic is that 1 in 5 people have a mental illness of some sort. So let's look down at these stats. 21%, which is slightly above 1 in 5, of US adults experienced mental illness in 2020. That's 52.9 million people. That is a lot of people. And this represents 1 in 5 adults. 5.6 of US adults experienced serious mental illness in 2020, which is 14.2. 16.5 of US youth age 6 to 17 experienced a mental health disorder in 2016. And 6.7% of US adults experienced a co-occurring substance abuse disorder and mental illness in 2020. So those are some information on mental health by the numbers on NAMI. Statistics of employment. According to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, as of April 18th, 2022, there are currently 20,800 recreational therapist jobs in the United States of America. But according to NCTRC, there are just 19,000 recreational therapists who hold the Certified Therapeutic Recreation Specialist certification, which means there's 1,800 that are not certified in that. Now, where does that come from? NCTRC's statistics do not capture the number of recreational therapists that are licensed in the state of Oklahoma, UT, New Hampshire, North Carolina, and New Jersey, or the number of recreational therapists holding solely state certifications in Texas or California. So the other 2 places that have certifications besides NCTRC are C-Track, and then the one from California, which is through the Parks and Recreation Board. But they do not count themselves under NCTRC, but they can also be recreational therapists. Behavioral health has now become the predominant area that employs recreational therapists. This statistic is incorrect. It actually is 66%. I was corrected on this, which means that over half of 19,000, so over like 10,000 CTRSs work in behavioral health, for instance. All right, the type of behavioral health settings that we work in: hospital inpatient settings, residential mental health treatment settings, and outpatient settings. And we'll break them apart into each one and further what types of specific settings. Hospital inpatient settings are where somebody stays overnight in the hospital. They could be of any age, a kid to an adult. They are usually there for an acute reason. So like they're there because maybe they're homicidal, suicidal, maybe they're detoxing off something, maybe they had a psychotic break, etc. And they need to get their medicines looked at so that they get to a more level place. Or they can be in a setting where it's like subacute, where they live there at the hospital and they either they spent over 180 days being in a hospital under an acute reason, and therefore because they spent so many days during the year under the acute reason, they got put on the residential unit because for some reason they're not getting better, they're not being able to stay off the streets or stay out of trouble. And so so they'll go to a subacute unit. Also, what brings you to a subacute unit might be forensic reasons. So like somebody gets accused of a crime and they're not mentally able to defend themselves under the Dusky standard. That means that they have to go to a treatment hospital until they get to a place where they can understand the charges against them and understand that their lawyer is on their team and that the judge is not their enemy, that they have the ability to defend themselves. And if they never understand that, then they'll be in the hospital until the very last day of whatever their proposed sentence would have been. So the max sentence for somebody who commits arson is 20 years. Maybe under a forensic reason, they plead not guilty by reason of insanity. And because of that, and then they get their medications fixed, so they don't have to be in the hospital for 20 years. But let's say that they never do, and they never pass the Dusky standard to where they can actually have a trial. They will be in the hospital for the maximum of 20 years, which is kind of like being in jail. So those are some things to think about. Psychiatric hospitals and then general medical and surgical hospitals can have these types of settings within their hospital systems. All right, residential mental health treatment settings. So these are like within the community after somebody discharges, broken down into two areas: a psychiatric residential center, so like someplace that is meant for helping people in the community that have mental illness, like Andrews Center or MHMR, mental health and mental retardation, basically is what it stands for. It needs to change, but that's what it stands for. But those organizations are geared towards helping people in the community get their medicines, get counseling, get access to psychiatric care. And then there's also drug and rehab programs. So like if you need to detox off of something, or if, you know, like whatever you've been doing isn't working, you can check yourself in one of these hospitals, or somebody else can check you in, court ordered, and get you back to a sober state of mind, and which will take you through all the stages of withdrawal and everything else. So those types of facilities exist. And then outpatient settings. So this is when somebody comes into the hospital and then they leave. They just go in for an appointment and then they leave. Okay, so this can be partial hospitalization where they're in the hospital certain days of the week, but then they leave the rest of it and they just check in. Could be intensive outpatient programs where, like, I'm going to go see this person for psychotherapy and counseling Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday for a period of whatever, how many weeks. Just going to drive in and drive home. Outpatient clinics where somebody can receive therapy or counseling. And it's just more like a private pay type, or not a private owned facility usually that has these type of things. Or community mental health centers like MHMR. And they treat persons who fall below the poverty level. And that's an outpatient. All right, and our role in this setting, this is what recreational therapists should be doing in mental health, no matter what area you work in. You should be leading group therapy. You should write documentation, make sure you're taking good documentation notes. Attending interdisciplinary team meetings. Shouldn't just not attend because the rest of the team doesn't think you should. You should be there because what you're doing is valuable. And then one-on-one therapy with clients. So besides these main deals, you could also be assigned other like areas like of responsibility. So for instance, administrative tasks such as planning the milieu for the unit, which means how it's all laid out, how it functions, etc. Could be managing employees, like you have assistants, or etc. Could be daily scheduling of the the unit's groups and activities for all therapy disciplines. So you might be determining, okay, what the theme is for this month. We're all going to be talking about depression. We're all going to be talking about anxiety. We're going to talk about perception, or we're going to talk about communication skills, or whatever the areas that you're focused on. And the social workers and the LPCs, etc., will be on the same page as you, and you can reinforce the same things you're taught. So I think instead of being random, you should always be doing that. Core competency training. So in the hospital I worked at, for instance, the rec therapist was responsible for teaching people the Dusky standard, basically teaching them how to behave in court, how to understand the charges against them, what all the different pleas mean, and what their lawyer is supposed to do, what the judge is supposed to do, the jury's supposed to do. And eventually, hopefully, if they all understand that, then they get to leave the hospital, which is super rewarding. Transportation could be a thing. So you might be taking your clients on outings in the community, which means you're going to be driving probably a big van, etc., which means part of your job might be obtaining a certain license to be able to transport people. Could be residential home supervision. So let's say you work in a group home as a recreational therapist or a group home community, and as a recreational therapist in that type of place, you might be responsible not only for therapy, but you might also be responsible for keeping track of the clients, staying overnight, making sure that food was made in the morning, etc. So these are other roles that a recreational therapist can have, but they aren't necessarily the four core areas. All right, leading group therapy. Group therapy with clients who have histories of substance abuse or dependence requires active, responsive leaders who keep the group lively and on task. So you can't be boring. You can't just be writing on a board. You have to be able to engage the people that are attending the class so that they can take the information and run with it. But you also might be responsible for multiple groups throughout the day, which means maybe your first group is themed one way, then your next group is themed another way. And for me, what it worked was because people were staying from 3 to 7 days, is I created a 2-week-long program so that if somebody attended the hospital, they're going to have different sessions in the morning and the afternoon, and they're going to, if they came back immediately, they'll be on a whole nother realm of classes and groups, so that they get all the information they need from these group settings as possible. But it's also super important that your groups are not just activity-based or diversional, because the hospital cannot bill for your services if what you're doing is just filling time. If your goals for your group are that they are achieving, let's say, decreased symptoms of depression, right? And the way you demonstrated that was through this activity. This person went from this particular level of depression to this level of depression. You are showing an increase, a measurable increase or a measurable decrease, which is a benefit of having recreational therapy programs at the hospital. If you are just like, for instance, I worked with a recreational therapist that pretty much gave up on a profession, and he was teaching emergency preparedness because he was just really big into like what to do in case of a tornado, what to do in case of a fire, etc. Those things weren't really appropriate for recreational therapists, but he taught those things. Don't ask me why, but he'd been a recreational therapist for 20 plus years, and he just basically was burnt out. So, and leading those types of groups, those are not the type of groups you should be leading for treatment. So, documentation writing. Documentation is super important for all aspects of recreational therapy. I'll give you 4 good reasons. One is that it's important to protect our programs. It shows that we have use in our programs and that we're achieving goals. It's important to protect your patients, where it promotes quality of care and make sure that the patients are all individually addressed and taken care of. Documentation, good documentation is also to protect the provider. It can make sure that you don't get sued because you're actually doing certain things that are achieving results. And good documentation is used for collecting data for publishing professional journals. So it shows that research has been done in our field and that A plus B equals C. So for instance, like I do this therapy for this reason, and then at the end, typically a client will improve by this. And that shows that if it's repeated over time, that it can become an active part of interventions that we have available to us. Okay, so documentation is super important. And then attending the interdisciplinary meetings was the third point. Typically, these meetings include a doctor, nurse, social worker, LPC, recreational therapist, maybe a music therapist, maybe an art therapist, and then the client or the client's family. It's very important that you attend these sessions, not only for your own knowledge, but it will allow you to have a voice. So in the care of the client, you'll actually be able to say, I recommend this, and this is why. You'll also be able to share pertinent information that you gathered, because your assessment is based off of what makes people tick, and you know what motivates them and what really gets them to move forward. So you can probably reach a lot more clients than the LBC or the social worker can. Also shows that you're a valuable part of the team. So that you are, you actually have stuff to contribute, that what you're teaching or doing on the unit actually has value. And so people start respecting them. They can see why you were hired to do that job. And then also you get a chance to learn from other disciplines that have learned different things that maybe will help you with your clients. So what I'm trying to say is it's super important that you attend and don't take no for an answer. All right, and then one-on-one therapy with clients. So this is something a lot of rec therapists may or may not feel comfortable with, but it is within our scope that you can actually work one-to-one with clients on a psychotherapy basis, not a counseling basis. But the psychotherapy basis, you might include elements of cognitive behavioral therapy, where you're retraining neural pathways, or you might be focusing on a different type of dialectical behavioral therapy, which is specifically for people with borderline personality disorder, which challenges their own thoughts and beliefs and puts them back into reality. But like this one-on-one time that you spend with clients, you can get a lot of good information out, and you can use whatever recreation or leisure activity to draw that information out of the person. Because sometimes people feel more comfortable when they're participating in something than if they're being interrogated or interviewed by somebody in a room where it's super quiet and that they're not really feeling comfortable. So super important right here. You can see what areas of competency we have on the NCTRC website if you are unsure that you feel confident doing CBT with clients. But check out their website on the job analysis report. That's the most recent one that they've published. So check it out. All right. Now, finally, we're going to get to discussion questions for the group. So these are the things that I want you to think about and talk about, and really just kind of grow your understanding about. So today, with all the information, all 3 chapters and all of the things we talked about, including philosophies, history, and how we fit into the field, what stood out to you about the history of our profession? Was there anything you learned about our history that kind of made you go, uh-huh, so that's why we're like this, or that's what's going on, that's what brought us here? Number 2 would be, what treatment philosophies do you feel will best impact our field as a whole moving forward? So I presented to you some treatment philosophies. I really went into detail on why I believe the one that I focus on, which is treatment as an active treatment for recovery, remediation, etc., for all the 5 domains, is like the super important one that'll help us grow in the future. But you can also give your reasonings for whatever thought you have. 3, what specifically are you going to do as your role as a recreational therapist in the behavioral health setting? So what are you going to do differently? Did you attend treatment team groups before? Did you do one-on-ones? Did you have diversionary groups instead of groups that are treatment-based? What are you going to do differently so that you can improve your skill set as a recreational therapist? All right, and thank you. All right, so if you have any questions, this is up on the website at smartceeushub.com on our learning management platform. And you'll also be able to see the other sessions that were provided during the Smart CEU retreat. This will only be up for the next 3 or 4 months. And then after that, those will go down. And we will be preparing for next year for the Smart CEU retreat as well. But the questions, you can contact me. My name is Nathan Lemaster. Again, I'm the founder of Smart CEUs Hub. Contact me at nathan@smartceeushub.com, or you can call me at 903-508-0028, or go to the website at smartceeushub.com. If you aren't already currently an unlimited CEUs member, that is probably the best deal that we have, where you pay $149 a year and you have access to our complete library of continuing education options, which right now is over 255 clock hours of NCTRC approved education. And as you know, as a recreational therapist, we only need 50 clock hours, aka 5 CEUs every 5 years. So you have plenty to choose from and over 5 certification cycles to choose from at this time. And the library continues to grow as we get new instructors. So without further ado, thank you so much for tuning in. And I really hope you learned something and you also understand how what you do or what you choose to do as a recreational therapist doesn't just impact your job. It also impacts all of us. All right. I hope you have a great day and I look forward to hearing from you. All right. Talk to you soon.